The administration of justice is such an inexact science that it can never be done perfectly. Innocent people will be convicted of crimes, the guilty will go free, and sentences will be handed down that simply don't fit the crime. This has been the case throughout all of human history. In recent years, a harsh spotlight has been shown on the activities of police officers who seem to carry out street-level administration of justice much differently for people of color than they do for anyone else. But the issues go much further than your local police force. Increasingly, it seems like there are two different versions of the court system, one which deals with those of us who don't boast seven-figure incomes, and one for the absurdly rich. And it doesn't take a social scientist to see which one treats the accused more gently. If you can stomach it, check out today's list of the 10 worst crimes rich people have gotten away with. Finnish band Hanoi Rocks thought they had hit the big time when they came to Los Angeles in 1984 to embark on their second ever American tour, backing up the already legendary hard rock outfit Motley Crue. On the day they arrived, they spent the day at Crue lead singer Vince Neil's house by Redondo Beach, which, when the crew were involved, meant copious amounts of alcohol. As night fell, Neil and Hanoi Rocks drummer Nicholas Razzle Dingley decided to make a run to the liquor store, with Neil behind the wheel, despite the fact that he was blind drunk. The trip ended tragically but predictably, as Neil, who was later found to have a blood alcohol content of 0.17, well above California's legal limit, smashed into an oncoming vehicle. The two occupants of that car were seriously injured and left with brain damage. But Dingley wasn't even that lucky, as he died on the scene. Charged with driving under the influence and vehicular manslaughter, Neil was sentenced to a ridiculous 30 days in jail, of which he only served half, and a steep fine. Speaking about the incident years later, Neil admitted that he should have gone to prison, and deserved to, but didn't because that's the power of cash. In an interview with Yahoo Music, one of Neil's peers, former Twisted Sister frontman Dee Snider, went just a little bit further, calling Neil a murderer and expressing his bafflement that he did no serious jail time. Matthew Broderick endeared himself to the world in the mid-80s as the star of the beloved 1986 John Hughes classic Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But many don't remember the gruesome incident which almost landed him in serious legal jeopardy just a year later. While on vacation in Ireland with Ferris co-star Jennifer Grey, whom he had begun secretly dating, Broderick was behind the wheel when a head-on collision occurred, which claimed the lives of 63-year-old Margaret Doherty and her 30-year-old daughter Anna Gallagher. Investigators were able to determine that Broderick's car had been in the wrong lane, although the star himself claimed not to remember why, or indeed anything else about the day's events leading up to the crash, as he sustained a serious concussion among numerous other injuries, including a broken leg. Grey was only slightly injured, suffering from whiplash after the incident. Even though the accident left the small Irish town of Enniskillen devastated and heartbroken, Broderick, who initially had faced the charge of death by dangerous driving, carrying a potential 5-year prison sentence, pled guilty to the lesser charge of careless driving, and was fined a paltry $175. The victim's family called the outcome a travesty of justice, and it's tough to disagree. Ethan Couch has become the poster boy for the condition sardonically described as affluenza, the state of being so rich and privileged that the sufferer is unable to tell right from wrong. In 2013, the then 17-year-old was driving on a suspended license while heavily intoxicated at a high rate of speed through a residential area when he smashed into a group of Good Samaritans who were attempting to help a motorist who was having car problems. 4 people died and 9 were injured, including 2 passengers in Couch's own truck, one of whom suffered complete paralysis. The only thing more infuriating than the affluenza defense mounted by Couch's attorney was that the judge bought it, sentencing the youth to 10 years probation in lieu of any jail time. Even though he got off with a slap on the wrist, Couch was unable even to abide by the incredibly light terms of his sentence, violating his probation by fleeing with his mother to Mexico in 2015. Finally, in light of his probation violation, Couch was sentenced to jail, but only for 2 years, sparking further outrage among the many who believe that he should have been dealt with far more harshly from the beginning. He began serving his sentence in April 2016 and was released right on schedule in April 2018. He may have made women swoon with his sexually suggestive lyrics, but R&B singer R. Kelly has long been known to have a fascination, perhaps a criminal one, with underage girls. He famously married fellow singer Aaliyah in 1994 when she was only 15 in an illegal ceremony. But in 2002, a videotape surfaced which showed Kelly engaging in behavior which was even more shocking. In the tape, Kelly was seen having sex with and urinating on a young girl, who appeared to be his goddaughter, who would have been about 14 at the time. In the course of investigating the allegations, police also discovered 12 images on the digital camera belonging to Kelly, which showed the singer engaged in sex acts with a minor female. Amazingly, charges related to the images were dropped due to lack of probable cause for the search warrants used to obtain them. But in 2008, after a series of delays, Kelly was put on trial on a litany of charges related to the videotape. He claimed not to be the man on the tape, despite the fact that it certainly looked like him and that the video was shot in a room which bore a distinct resemblance to Kelly's own living room. It seemed to be an unbelievably poor defense, but shockingly, the jury acquitted Kelly after minimal deliberations due to a supposed lack of evidence. The entire debacle, along with recent allegations that Kelly is the leader of an abusive sex cult populated entirely with young but not underage women, has done little to dim his legacy among his fans. Kelly remains one of the highest-selling singers in R&B history, despite the fact that he is almost certainly an unapologetic sexual predator. Indisputably one of the greatest basketball players of all time, Kobe Bryant, who played his entire career for the Los Angeles Lakers before retiring in 2016, recently made headlines by becoming the rare pro athlete to win an Academy Award for his short animated film entitled Dear Basketball. But unfortunately for Bryant, the accolade also served to dredge up a sordid incident from his past, one which has cast a long shadow over his life and professional legacy. In June 2003, Bryant was staying at the Lodge and Spa at Cordillera in Edwards, Colorado, in advance of a minor surgical procedure. During his stay, it was alleged by a 19-year-old employee of the hotel that Bryant had physically restrained and raped her, prompting an investigation by the Eagle, Colorado Sheriff's Office. The investigation yielded evidence including bruises on the victim's neck and blood matching her DNA on Bryant's clothing, serious enough to warrant charges of sexual assault and false imprisonment against the basketball superstar, which could have carried a sentence of life in prison. But after tearfully confessing to the encounter, which he claimed was consensual, in a public appearance with his wife by his side, Bryant was let off the hook when the victim informed prosecutors that she would not testify. A subsequent civil suit was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, and Bryant was free to continue his Hall of Fame career. Eagle, Colorado police found themselves in the middle of yet another controversy in 2010, when Martin Erzinger, a private wealth manager for Morgan Stanley Smith Barney, was involved in a hit-and-run car accident which left the victim, Dr. Stephen Milo, with debilitating injuries. Milo was riding his bike when Erzinger struck him, then fled the scene of the accident, but he was apprehended in a crosstown parking lot and was initially charged with felony hit-and-run. But unbelievably, Eagle County prosecutor Mark Hurlburt, the very same prosecutor who presided over Kobe Bryant's aborted rape trial, chose instead to dismiss that charge and slap Erzinger with a pair of misdemeanor charges instead, offering up the lame excuse that a felony might, under certain conditions which by no means would have been the only possible outcome in a felony trial, have eventually been expunged from Erzinger's record, while allowing him to plead to the lesser charges would ensure that those charges would remain part of his record forever. Hurlburt also cited the fact that jail time would affect Erzinger's income, which would in turn affect his ability to pay reparations to the victim, despite the fact that Dr. Milo himself was infuriated by the decision to pursue the lesser charges. In a letter to Hurlburt, Milo asserted that Mr. Erzinger struck me, fled, and left me for dead on the highway, and that neither his financial prominence nor my financial situation should be factors in your prosecution of this case. Unfortunately, his plea fell on deaf ears, and Erzinger never served a day in jail for his crime. 25-year-old Englishman Colin Reed was a Cambridge graduate and management consultant with a six-figure salary who had married his college sweetheart Elizabeth. But after only 3 months of marriage, Reed began to show an extremely dark side of himself, a side which was prone to extremely violent outbursts over the most minor of provocations. After friends came forward to report the abuse, Elizabeth, who was understandably terrified of her husband, eventually told authorities that Reed had slashed her with a knife for failing to make his sandwiches for lunch the next day, beat her mercilessly with his fist when she tried to complain about this treatment, and in a separate incident literally branded her with a hot iron for not properly pressing his shirts. At trial, the judge inexplicably ruled that unnamed special circumstances meant that Reed was unlikely to reoffend, and declined even to sentence him to community service since his profession rendered him too busy to complete such a sentence. As his wife, who by this time had filed for divorce, sat quietly in the corner of the courtroom, Reed was handed down a fine of £2,000, and that was all. Women's rights groups all over the UK were enraged by the verdict, noting that 2 women per week are killed by their domestic partners in the country, and that a fine was hardly a suitable punishment for such a sadistic crime. And Elizabeth herself conceded that there didn't seem to be much point in bringing the case to trial, a worrying sentiment for all victims of domestic abuse. Veteran character actor Robert Blake began his Hollywood career in Little Rascals shorts in the 1940s and was perhaps best known for his lead role in the 1970s cop drama series Beretta. But these days he's well known for a different reason. He almost certainly succeeded in arranging the successful contract murder of his wife, Bonnie Backley, and escaping punishment for the crime. After dinner at a Studio City restaurant, Backley was waiting in the car while Blake went back inside, ostensibly to retrieve his gun, which he had left in the restaurant, when a man approached the vehicle and shot her point blank in the head, killing her instantly. A police investigation turned up no fewer than 3 men who all testified that Blake had approached them with an offer of cash for Backley's life. But at his subsequent trial, defense attorneys were able to diligently poke holes in the credibility of all 3 men, who were admitted drug users, and Blake himself chose not to testify. In returning a not guilty verdict on all charges, the jury made clear that they did not believe the testimony of the would-be assassins. But at a later civil trial where the burden of proof is much lower, Blake was found liable for Backley's death in order to pay up, to the tune of $30 million. Blake filed for bankruptcy and has not worked a day as an actor since, but most familiar with the case agree that he got off ridiculously easy. On June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman were found brutally butchered outside a Los Angeles condominium. Suspicion quickly fell on Simpson's estranged husband, Hall of Fame running back and beloved actor O.J. Simpson, who did nothing to allay suspicions by leading police on a famous low-speed chase in his white Ford Bronco and offering up many conflicting versions of his whereabouts that night. It became the trial of the century, with Simpson and his mind-bogglingly expensive dream team of attorneys pulling out every trick in the book to plant doubts in the minds of the jury. Despite overwhelming amounts of physical and circumstantial evidence, Simpson was acquitted at trial, but like Robert Blake a decade later, was hammered with a judgment north of $30 million during a later civil suit brought by members of Goldman's family. Unable to rehabilitate his public image, let alone his career, Simpson only regained the limelight by participating in the armed robbery of a Las Vegas sports memorabilia dealer a decade later, an event which finally landed him right where many believe he should have been all along, in prison. He was finally released in October 2017, after serving a 9-year sentence, but the now 70-year-old will always be a pariah due to the vicious crimes that virtually everyone in the world believes he got away with. Robert Richards IV is the heir to the DuPont family fortune, meaning that his pocket cash could probably sustain most of us for years. In 2009, he was accused of what any rational person would consider to be among the most heinous of crimes, the rape of his 3-year-old daughter, who had reported the incident to Richards' then-wife Tracy. Faced with this report as well as slam-dunk evidence, Richards pled guilty and received an 8-year prison sentence. But then the judge made a decision that baffles and infuriates those familiar with the case to this day. Opining that Richards would not fare well in prison, Delaware Superior Court Judge Jan Jordan suspended Richards' prison sentence, opting instead to sentence him to 8 years probation and mandating treatment at an inpatient facility. Even Richards' defense attorney expressed shock at the decision, and Tracy Richards was left to pursue the only recourse possible, a civil suit, which was settled for an undisclosed sum in 2014. To this day, not only has Richards been spared a single day in prison for his disgusting crime, he has even failed to report for his court-ordered treatment, a failure which has likewise so far not produced any consequences.